Hey everyone, we're here. It's happening. DF Direct Weekly number 78. Lots to talk about this week. This week being the week of Tokyo Game Show. And joining me first of all, John Linneman.
Hey Rich, I regret to inform you though that this direct is going to have a little less farming than that other direct, which we will also talk about.
Alex Battaglia, you're into a bit of farming.
Yeah, I'm, a farmer at heart. What can I say? Some exciting games here to talk about. Some visually eye-popping ones that we definitely are going to have to spend a lot of time on, and I'm excited. Let's do this.
Let's start off with our first news topic of the week. So, alongside TGS, Sony revealed PlayStation VR to press. And while we weren't invited to get an early hands-on, we know somebody who did. So, John, we've got a special segment lined up here. Why don't you introduce it?
That's right. So I sat down with Eurogamer's Ian Higton, who's a jolly fellow and very passionate about VR. He's been doing the VR corner for a long time. He spent basically an entire day playing with PSVR2, and I created this special report grilling him on that very subject. So this direct is extra long this week because we have this whole, 40-something minute segment here with Ian about the PSVR2. So if you want to know about PSVR2, enjoy the special report. Otherwise, you can skip ahead to the next segment. So let's jump in. Yes, that's right. We have a special report here, direct from Eurogamer headquarters, or not. It's Ian Higton.
Hello. No, this is my office, my home office. They won't let me back into the office. At
That's a lovely
anymore.
office. You got a RoboCop poster there. That's all you need. I mean,
yeah, RoboCop,
I approve.
Doom, video game treasures all over the place.
Excellent. But Ian, I think you are the man most known for covering virtual reality games within a certain sphere of the internet. You've continued to bang the drum for years. I salute you for this. So it's of no surprise then that you were one of the first in the public, I guess, or the press, to actually test PSVR 2.
Yeah.
There was no event around here, so I didn't get a chance to see it. And that's why you're here, so I can kind of pick your brain.
Cool. Well, my brain is very simple compared to the average digital Foundry brain, so apologies if I do some baby tech, but
it's all right.
I'll try my best.
Nobody's competing with Richard Ledbetter.
Nobody could. He's the champ.
No,
he's the king.
Exactly. So Ian, all right. Let's start. I want to talk about the actual form factor of the unit itself, the comfort levels, the materials, all this kind of stuff. So setting the stage then, I think both of us, we've used PSVR 1, Oculus Rift S, both Quest variants,
yes.
And then I've also spent some time with the Vive and the Index. And you've not really used the Index, I think, at all.
I have never used the Index. It's a bit out of my price range. I've used the Vive once at an expo, but really my only experience with VR is Rift, the two Quests, and the PSVR 1.
Okay, so I mentioned this because I think it's important to set the sort of basis of what you've used before jumping to PSVR 2. First of all, weight. How does this compare to all the other solutions in terms of resting on your head?
It feels incredibly light. I was very pleasantly surprised by how light it is, especially with a cable attached. A lot of people were worried about the cable being attached to the headset. A lot of people are used to the Quest 2 having a wireless solution. PlayStation VR 2's cable is not only nice and long, about 4.5 meters, so I didn't have any tangling issues with it when I was playing.
Or draping? No cord draping?
No, well, obviously it was draping down from the headset, but what it didn't do was pull the headset down. When I have played on the PlayStation VR 1, that has a big chunky bunch of cables, and that often pulls my headset down. Same with my Rift S, that's got quite a thick cable, and I often feel that pulling my headset down. But in terms of weight from both the headset and the cable, it was surprisingly light to a point where I kind of forgot I was wearing it at times.
And that's the key, right? Because at least for me, I typically don't forget that I'm wearing it because I don't find them all that comfortable.
Yeah.
The Rift S is probably the most comfortable that I've used for a long time, even that not perfect. So is this a case where it sort of rests on the back of your head more, kind of like, I guess, Rift S and PSVR, or is it like, how does it actually sit on your face in terms of where's the pressure point?
So it's very much like the PlayStation VR1. You have a soft kind of cushion for your forehead and a
Right.
soft cushion at the back of the strap as well, with kind of, it's almost exactly like the PlayStation 1 in terms of pulling it open. So you have a
Right.
button on the scope, which you slide out, and then a button on the back so you can kind of stretch the headband out, put it on your head, and then it kind of gently closes in, nice and soft on the head, on the forehead and the back of the head. And then there's a dial on the back button as well, which you can use to tighten it up and keep it nice and sturdy. So in terms of comfort, like, I actually found it really comfortable. I don't like using the Quest 2 very much. I find that quite uncomfortable and very heavy on the face.
Yep.
Like you, I prefer the Rift S, and the Rift S tends to get a little bit hot around the foam for me.
Exactly,
But,
same.
yeah, but the PlayStation VR2 has a bit more of a plastic. I couldn't really say what kind of material it is, but it's kind of like the PlayStation VR1's cushion. I didn't feel it getting hot or anything. So yeah, really nice and comfy.
And what about the sound then? Remind me, how does the sound work on this? Is it actually like individual headphones you put in your ears, or is it actually more like the Rift S where it kind of projects sound out?
I actually only used the sound, the Pulse headset for the sound.
Oh, okay.
So
So it's not
it
like
was,
built in necessarily.
it could be, but all the demo stations had 3D Pulse headsets.
But then there's the screens, obviously. This is the big thing. The resolution on these screens is quite high, actually. Like 2000 by 2000 something per eye.
Yeah.
I don't have the exact specs here.
2000 by 2040.
Okay, so that's pretty impressive and a significant, huge jump up from the original PSVR.
Oh yes,
but
yeah.
also a big jump up from stuff like the Rift S and the Quest, I would say.
Yeah, I think the Rift
so-
S is about half the resolution.
Yeah, something like
of
that.
the PSVR2.
So I guess that's the question then. With this resolution, we could still go higher, but do you feel like the screen door effect has been mostly eliminated by now? Like, how does it look in terms of overall clarity and what you're looking at?
Really clear, really bright, really vibrant. Very hard to kind of see the pixels amongst the incredible detail of the visuals. If you are coming from a PlayStation VR1 to a PlayStation VR2, it's kind of like the jump from SD PlayStation 2 to HD PlayStation 3. There's that much difference in the crispness and the clarity of the graphics. If you've played PlayStation 1 before, you'll know that if you hold an object close to your face, it gets really clear and sharp and you can see a lot of detail, but as soon as it's about, I don't know, a meter or an arm's length away from you, it becomes blurred and muddy, like someone's put Vaseline over your lens or whatever. But with the PlayStation VR2, detail in distant environments still looked super clean and clear. Like there's a bit in my video coverage where I show some B-roll of your character in Horizon Call of the West climbing over a canyon, and there is a waterfall in the distance. And when I experienced that in real life, looking over at that waterfall, it was so crisp, and I could make out the details of the water splashes and stuff. It was almost like being there in real life, compared to PlayStation 1, which would be like squinting at the details from that distance.
On that then, did you actually feel like the HDR aspect that they've advertised was in effect here? Which you've used HDR displays, right? Like, you're familiar with how that looks?
I've got a 4K HDR TV, so I'm familiar with the different kind of
so you kind of get like
brightness levels,
the
and
bright
contrast
highlights, the increased contrast, things like that. Like, how does this actually look compared to, say, any other headset, Quest, Rift S? Like, what do you feel? How does that strike you in terms of the difference?
Well, compared to the PlayStation VR1, again, it's like kind of leagues ahead. PlayStation VR1 it struggled to do, proper blacks. It was always a little bit like backlit and washed out.
Yeah, see, that was actually a big complaint for me as well, because if you, even though it's an OLED screen, when in VR mode, they would actually like increase the luminance of the black area, so it was very washed out and grainy looking.
Yeah.
And you're saying that's fixed.
It seems pretty fixed to me. There was a point where I was playing The Walking Dead Saints and Sinners, and you're going through this really dark hotel. All the lights are out. It's a zombie apocalypse, and you bring up a torch. Before you bring up the torch, it's almost completely pitch black, and then because of the HDR, you get all these lovely kind of different shades of black and the different bits of contrast that just, I don't know, it makes going through that darkened environment feel a lot more real. It's sharper as well. The PlayStation VR one, again, in dark areas kind of gets quite muddy and just turns into kind of dark blobs, whereas this, you could see the detail in the environment. Even
so where would you slot the Rift S then in there? Because Rift S uses an LCD, but it does seem to have better, so it doesn't have OLED blacks in terms of, it can't match that, but it still did seem like an improvement over PSVR 1. Like how where does this fall in terms of between PSVR 1 and PSVR 2? Where would you put the Rift S?
Honestly, I'd say the Rift S would be just below the PSVR 2 in terms of HDR stuff. Like,
because the Rift S doesn't do HDR at all.
No, but it's not as washed out or as noticeable. Those black areas when you're playing on the Rift S, you don't sit there and think to yourself, that kind of looks washed out or a bit too bright to be normal black. You know what I mean? But I don't think it was as accurate in terms of HDR as the PSVR 2.
Okay, so it sounds like the increased pixel density, the black level performance, and I got to see the HDR for myself because I can really judge that for sure, and we'll have more on that obviously. But it definitely sounds like the screen is a significant step forward. I guess, you wouldn't know the actual frame rates of the games you were playing though, huh? Because it could, with PSVR 1, it was usually mixed where you'd have some games that were technically 60 frames per second, but they would actually use like asynchronous time warp to sort of move the head motion up to 120 hertz.
Yeah.
So you kind of have this split weird feel. Some would actually be like native 90 hertz, I think. Like, how did the motion in these games strike you? I mention this because the B-roll for Horizon that we got here is only at 30 FPS for some reason, which doesn't make sense. And I'm pretty sure that game was not 30 FPS.
No, if it was 30 FPS, I'd have been vomiting my lovely little VR loving socks off. No, according to Sony, every game is targeting between 90 to 120 hertz. I felt like it was a smooth experience all the way through every game I played. I didn't notice any stuttering or any frame rate issues that made my stomach lurch. It was a really
Did it feel
comfortable,
suitably PC quality, would you say?
Yeah, at times higher than PC quality, because a lot of my experiences, I've not used an index, so top of the line stuff I can't compare to, but I've played Resident Evil Village in VR on the Rift S using a flat screen to VR mod, and that looked beautiful. Resident Evil Village through the PlayStation VR 2 was so much crisper. I mean, the difference in resolution is amazing between those two headsets. I was spotting incidental details in the graphics that I'd completely missed in both flat and VR mode. It was just so easy to just be stopped and wowed by the fleur de gris, like gold design work on all the doors and the walls. Looking up at the Domitresque castle as I walked towards it was just, every edge was nice and straight and crisp. It was, looked wonderful.
So, I guess I should say that as somebody that maybe isn't into the super technical stuff, the fact that you actually noticed this stuff and you felt that there was a perceived difference in clarity, at least to me, sort of speaks volumes about it, and does suggest that it probably is pretty significant.
Yeah. I know how to turn a console on, and that's about it, John. In terms
of
technical stuff.
That's kind of the thing, right? Like, you've played a lot of VR though, so you do have a lot of this experience with checking out the differences between this stuff. So that's fascinating. Maybe we actually should talk about some of these game implementations, which would also feed into another hardware feature I'm curious about, is like the
Mm-hmm.
rumble stuff, the sensation stuff.
Yeah.
So, all right, which game used that best? So we'll start with that game.
Okay, best game to use the headset built rumble feature, the sensor tech whatever it's called, was Horizon Call of the Mountain. Mainly because that was the first of the games I played, and I actually forgot that headset rumble was a feature. I was so excited testing it all out and everything, and then I put it on, and it starts off with a very sedate boat ride along a river where two characters are just talking at you, and I'm always a bit worried by those moments because I'm like, I just want to do a game,
Exactly.
But the Fire Sprite and Gorilla they've created this incredible lush forest around the boat and around the river with so much stuff to look at and see as you're going down, including like tall necks walking over you and watchers running through the overgrowth, whatever. But the moment that really like made me go wow was when it's called a storm bird, I think, a giant robot bird. It flew from a mountain to my right over my head and off into the distance, and as it did so the headset rumbled and it kind of felt like a jet plane was passing over the top of me, and it took me by surprise. Whoa, that was really cool. So it worked nicely. There are options, nice and easy options to quickly turn that feature off, because I think maybe for newcomers it might be a bit of a sensory overload. And also,
I see what you mean.
Yeah, also maybe some veterans might not enjoy having their head vibrated all the time. For me, I enjoyed that sensation. I thought it was, an extra bit of realism, but it's easy to switch off if you don't want it.
The vibration type, then, would you say it's comparable to this type of vibration in, say, the DualSense controller?
Yeah, it's a single motor, I think.
Because that feels very different from like old school Rumble, right? It's not the same.
It's not
it
the
is
same
more
as
like
the
that.
N64 Rumble Pack, no.
No.
It was definitely more sensitive, as the Stormbird flew over, it kind of started off slow, grew to a crescendo, and then tailed off. I could feel, the motion of it going. When it was at the peak, it did feel quite rumbly, almost a bit too much. You can kind of hear it rumble a bit, but I don't know. I think it was fine, and the fact that you can turn it off if you need, very easy. All you have to do, all the setup for the headset is really easy. You just bring up the dashboard, and there'll be a PlayStation VR2 card there with easy to do calibration settings and whatever.
Actually, while you're mentioning that, how does that work? Like, how do you determine the barriers in your room, like where you can and cannot go safely and stuff like that?
So this is a really interesting piece of tech, actually. It works a little bit like the Oculus Pass-Through. It's called See-Through on the PlayStation VR2.
Ah, yeah.
And it looks a lot cleaner and sharper. The Quest 2's kind of got like a wobbly
the camera's
view to it.
Pretty bad.
Yeah, the PlayStation VR2 just kind of looks like a black and white photo. It's really much easier to look around and see your environment than it is in pass-through. And what you do, you have two options to go into see-through mode. You can there's a button under the right-hand side of the headset. So you've got the power button in the middle of the headset. So you turn it on there. When you're on and you're looking at the dashboard in PlayStation VR and you want to set out your play area, you can either press the see-through button and bring it up straight away, or you can choose Calibrate Room on the PSVR2 card that pops up. And then you get the see-through vision, and it's really clever what it does. All you have to do when you're calibrating your play area is look around your room. As you look around the room, the PlayStation VR builds this blue mesh, and it kind of detects where the empty areas are, where obstructions like chairs and walls are. And then once it's done that, it gives you a standard kind of grid on the floor that you'd expect from a Quest. But you can use then the Sense controllers to maybe draw extra bits on, or even tidy up areas by cutting corners off and stuff. So it's everything about it is consumer friendly and easy to use. It's like you put it on, you're set up within minutes. And that makes it really good as well for, if you're swapping players and stuff. Because another thing that's really good about PlayStation VR2, the initial setup is doing the IPD.
How does that work as well?
So,
is that mechanical or not, or software?
Both. On the PlayStation VR1,
okay.
it was software. On the PlayStation VR2, there's a mechanical option on the top left of the visor. There is a little dial, and you roll it backwards and forwards. You can also set up your IPD in the headset, and it's quite clever. When you've got the headset on, you'll be given a screen with like a square with 2 eye holes in to represent the headset. It'll tell you if the headset's on a wonk or not. It'll be green if it's nice and straight, but if you're wearing it wonky, it'll be slightly red, so you can straighten it up. And then it'll also, because of the eye tracking, it tracks where your eyes are, so it knows if your eyes are in the right place. So you basically have to, like when you're setting up a PlayStation VR1 and you have to hold the move controller with the ball in a circle. You kind of have to do that with your eyes. So you just move the mechanical bit and make sure your eyes are in the circles, and then it just goes, green circles around it to say that you're in the right place. And then your IPD sorted, and then you get the option to sort out the eye tracking, calibrate the eye tracking. And that, again, nice and simple, but quite cool. What it does is it brings up, again, a little graphic of 2 eyes. And if you blink and wink, those eyes do that in tandem with you. And then what it does is it'll ask you if you're ready to set up. You click yes, and you'll be taken to a black screen with a little red dot on it. And that red dot will bounce around the screen, and you have to keep your head very still, but follow that red dot with your eyes. Once that's done, it goes to a white screen. Again, follow the dot with your eyes. And then it's calibrated. It brings up another screen, again with those little eye icons that blink when you do. But it has about 8 or 10 dots around them. And when you look at them, they light up. So you can see that, it's following your eyes.
So you feel like Master Chief in Halo 1.
Yeah, it's great.
Dots Chief.
Yeah, exactly like that. Exactly like that. But I couldn't pick to invert my own head.
Wait. Oh, yeah.
Unfortunately.
All right. So how does it actually work in practice? Like the eye tracking stuff? Like what did you notice it doing in the game?
I was given a few examples of kind of the things that it could do. So, for instance, if you were playing a narrative game or a game where you're meeting characters, they'll be able to actually properly look you in the eye when they're talking to you to increase their physical presence. A lot of times you'll be talking to avatars and they're just kind of staring blankly off. These ones will now know where you're looking. So gameplay elements like that to add a bit of realism.
Okay.
The main thing I was shown off though, which was hard to kind of see in a way, was something called foveated rendering. Which in layman's terms, for people like me, basically the PlayStation 5 knows where you're looking, so it renders the pixels in more detail in the exact position you're looking, rather than places you're not looking. Yeah. Is that right?
It's basically rendering more pixels based on your eye position.
Yeah.
So the idea is to save on performance, right? Because performance is crucial in VR, so they can get away with rendering fewer pixels. The idea being that when you're looking over to the left, your eyes won't be able to focus on what's to the right. Right. They can essentially steal pixels from there.
Right.
So that was what I expected, and I'm curious. Did you find that effective, noticeable, jarring?
I found it
no. What did you think?
I found it so effective that I didn't really notice it was happening.
Which is good.
I'm just looking around, and like I said, everything crisp and clear. What is interesting though is I think that shows up on the share screen. So PlayStation VR2 has a share screen like the PlayStation VR1 does. And I think in the share screen, if you're, most of the time when you're watching someone play a game, you'll be looking where they are too. But I think in the share screen, you might be able to notice some of that foveated rendering going on the edges of the screen. You might see a bit of a lower resolution than a monster in the distance or whatever.
So the fact that you mentioned like the games using the tracking information, I could see some potential use cases there. Like imagine playing a multiplayer game with other players in VR and you can actually see the eye movement now.
Yeah.
Like how weird that and kind of cool that could be. You like look at somebody and they can see you looking at them.
I know, right? Like you already have things like VR chat where you can have mouth sensors where people's mouths move, but then you can have someone blinking at you, winking at you or whatever. In the Horizon demo, I'm not sure if eye tracking was being used for this, so don't quote me on it. But using the bow, I felt incredibly accurate with the bow. Like using bow in VR, a lot of the time I find it kind of like hard to hit objects, but I was nailing the shots with the bow. And whether that's because the game was following my gaze a little bit more and knowing where I wanted to aim, I don't know, but it felt like I was more accurate than normal with a virtual bow and arrow.
Okay, which kind of gets into the controllers then, right?
Yeah.
So fundamentally, this is possibly going to be the largest jump for people coming from PSVR 1 because it is more of an Oculus Touch style system now with inside out tracking from the headset. There's no more camera sitting on your TV monitoring you. You're not going to lose tracking by turning around. But I guess so. My question is, one, how does it actually compare to Oculus Touch in terms of accuracy and fidelity, but also the comfort and I guess, any cool uses of the rumble technology or the sensory technology in that?
Wow. Well, it's very, very similar to the Oculus Touch.
Which is good.
It's a little bit bigger than the Oculus Touch. You have this big kind of white ring that sits around your hand, and that gives you that finger.
It has finger
technology.
tracking.
Yeah, so
you can actually like move your fingers and the
character model will do that as well, or know what buttons your fingers are over, things like that.
Okay.
So again,
I think on the Oculus Touch it was just the thumb that has that.
Oh, maybe.
Right? And it's not even tracking your finger movement, but it has a capacitive surface where if you put your thumb on it, you'll see like the thumb of the character kind of move on or off.
Yeah.
The item,
yeah, this one definitely
more involved.
Definitely was a little bit more involved then if it's only the thumb for the Quest. They were nice and light. The button spacing was really comfortable. I never felt like I was reaching for any of the buttons with my fingers. You have on the front of the controllers, you've got adaptive triggers exactly like you have on the DualShock 5. So playing a game like the Star Wars Tales from Galaxy's Edge, every different blaster I used in that had a different kind of feel to the pull of the trigger and a little bit of different haptic feedback in the rumble to when it fired. So, you've got a lot of sensory feedback through those. So probably in a way, I'd say they were better than the touch controllers because, you've got the adaptive triggers and things.
All right, so like I noticed in this B-roll for Horizon, at one point the character in the B-roll sort of reaches down, places their hand in the water as they're going through that scene in the boat.
Yep.
Did you do that? And
yes.
two, does it actually like communicate well with that sort of rumble effect?
One, I did that, and two, it does a bit, yeah. I was splashing, and you kind of feel it. I mean, I was lost in the moment, so I don't remember it being like a huge vibration or something,
right.
But there was definitely a little bit of a sensation there. And yeah, you can splash around with the water as much as you like.
So, I mean, obviously, I guess the Oculus Touch has like rumble and vibration as well, of course, but it does sound like with the rumble trigger stuff and this, it's probably more in line with the not DualShock 5, the DualSense. The DualSense. It's basically like DualSense. Is that
what it's called?
Up.
I called it a DualShock 5, I think.
It's the DualSense. It's the DualSense. They changed it.
Nonsense.
Okay. So Horizon looks pretty scripted though. Like, do you get free movement, or is it really completely on rails? Like, how open is this?
Right. So with the Horizon demo, I wasn't told, or Sony wasn't able to tell me which games would be launch titles or not. But
Okay.
the Horizon game feels like a perfect launch title because
Right.
there's a design philosophy behind it that the developers were telling me about, which is basically they want to make it accessible for newcomers because obviously Sony wants to sell a bunch of new tech to new VR adopters, but they also want to make it visually impressive and exciting for veteran gamers, VR gamers as well. So it is very linear, and the demo I played started off with this sedate boat ride that lasts a good few minutes, and then you get knocked off the boat. You end up having to move through the water by swimming,
Okay.
and then once you get onto land, which in this case is a little wooden dock, you get a choice of movement type. Now, you can either use the thumbsticks to move, which is I think that's probably the veteran way to do it. Most people want to use the thumbstick moves, but I chose to use the gesture-based movement, which the developers said was kind of a bit more of an entry-level movement in a way, because it helps you get accustomed to the virtual environment, and that means moving by pumping your arms like that, like you're running. To avoid something, you have to push away or move your controllers to sidestep, and it worked well, but it lacked the accuracy of using the thumbsticks. Throughout that demo, it was a very linear path, though. There was a lot of climbing, and the climbing followed a path. You have to grab onto the right white bits of rock. You can choose which white bits to grab onto. But
it's like they partnered with Crytek for this one to make the climb 3.
The climb was one of the first things that came to my head when I was playing it. It was like, wow, I didn't expect that much verticality. And then from that climb area, we went through a little village with little bits to pick up and play with, like tambourines and maracas. And there was an area where I could cave paint on the wall and stuff, which kind of showed off the intricacies and the precision of the touch controllers, the sense controllers. So again, a nice demo into the new tech for newcomers or people who are used to using the Move and now have all this extra dexterity. And then I went into 2 battles, and this is where I understand why they've done it, but there is a lack of freedom in the battles, which veteran players aren't going to enjoy. What happens is the battles are very much on rails, but the rail is a circular path around the machine you're fighting.
Oh, I see.
So you have the machine in the middle or away from you. It will fire laser beams at you. You can dodge out the way with the thumbstick or with gestures. Constantly you're firing arrows at it, but you can't approach it. You can't get close to it. It will either charge at you, swipe at you with its tail or whatever appendage it's using, and you can physically duck under it. So you're kind of locked into this track. And I see why they've done it, because fighting a gigantic robot in free move VR is just going to be overwhelming, even for people with big VR legs. If you got this giant Thunderjaw stomping around, you're going to be like, what the... I don't know.
Sickness.
Yeah. So it is a good midway point, I guess, between giving veterans a good show, a good visual spectacle, because you get the scale of these giant machines. Standing under the Thunderjaw or watching as it charges towards you is terrifying. And you're firing these arrows off and dodging, but at the same time, it does feel a little bit like a quick time event, but with the added ability to be able to manually aim where you're shooting.
Yeah, I mean, this does sound like a title made for people that are graduating from PSVR and haven't really experienced proper hand control.
Yeah,
which
100%.
The Move does not provide. Let's be honest, it tries, but it doesn't get there.
No, it doesn't.
I mean, that's a bit of a shame. So, I guess that the next question I have then is Resident Evil Village. Like, do you feel like they've adapted it well? Because Resident Evil 7 people loved, but that was still a gamepad game in VR, right? And this looks like they've adopted the more Half-Life Alyx, other the more modern, you have full hand control while moving through. Like, how does it actually play compared to games like that?
Yeah, it plays great. You have, obviously, you can dual wield weapons, so you can play left-handed, right-handed. I was doing little tricks like throwing the gun in the air to spin to catch with my other hand. I was throwing my knife up and catching it on my gun to balance it, and playing with the physics that way.
Wait. What? So you're saying the gun is not attached to your hand?
No, the gun you can. The gun
is a
is
physical object.
Yeah, so the gun is kind of attached to your holster on your waist. You pick it up, you can throw it in the air, catch it with either hand. You can eject the magazines, throw the magazines up in the air, and if you're good enough, you can catch the magazine in the grip.
Okay,
so you can do cool tricks.
This comes as a surprise because that was actually one of my nitpicks with Half-Life Alyx was that the gun was essentially glued to your hand, right?
Yeah, no, it does. So if you drop the gun, after about 3 seconds, it will vanish and appear back on your band.
That's how they do it.
Same with the knife. So it's kind of like on an elastic band almost.
So I guess the question then is, if you drop the gun, can you duck down and pick it up again?
You can, but if you wait a couple of seconds, it'll appear back on your strap. And you
that would be an interesting difficulty setting, I think.
Yeah,
like the harder mode makes it so that the gun doesn't respawn for maybe like 2 minutes or something.
Yeah,
and you actually have to worry about scrambling to get your weapon, or enemies can knock it out of your hands.
Fumble mode, yeah. Totally. Yeah,
that would rule.
Yeah, like that would rule. And things like you can use your knife, right? So. You can throw your knife at objects and smash them.
Can you dual wield like one?
You can dual wield. Yeah, yes. I was shooting the monsters with the gun then stabbing them.
This is a fundamental shift. Then this is not just like the
it's
same
not just
game
gamepad
in VR.
Game. No,
Wow.
no. I've played a similar flat screen to VR mod for this, which gives you motion controls, but it was locked to right hand only.
Sure.
Your gun was stuck to your hand. Reloading was a button press. This is manual reloading. You have to grab your ammo from a pouch, put it in.
Yeah, like
Boneworks, cock the weapon.
Alex.
Yeah. What it doesn't have, which the mod had, was a full body. Just like PlayStation VR2, you're controlling a pair of floating hands. In the mod that Praydog made, you have a full body, which is quite cool, but it had some issues in terms of when you crouch down, the character model went all weird and stuff. So it's a good
I prefer the floating hands approach, to be honest. Like, it's definitely less problematic with the game world. I think
I quite like having a full body, to be honest. Just like in real life.
Oh yeah.
But I forget about having floating. The floating hands thing. It doesn't really bother me. I do prefer games where I can see a bit of body. It helps me get a bit immersed, I think. But that was really the only difference in terms of the mod that I found as a negative. The rest of the differences were positives for the PlayStation VR2 version.
That's pretty rad. You said Saints and Sinners, or it's Walking Dead games it's a sequel?
Every single PlayStation VR2 game that's been announced for some reason has a really long, unwieldy title. This one is called This one's called The Walking Dead: Saints and Sinners Chapter 2: Retribution.
Good Lord.
So this is like a direct sequel of the original The Walking Dead: Saints and Sinners game, which is one of my I think it might be my favorite PlayStation VR game, because it's kind of like a direct sequel, a follow-on. There's not a huge amount of difference in terms of gameplay. If you've played the original, you'll know exactly what to expect, minus some new weapons like a cool chainsaw and some new guns and things. But if you've only played Walking Dead: Saints and Sinners on the PlayStation VR, you're going to be very happy playing it with the touch controllers, because there's so much more accuracy to the movement. The amount of times I died to controller drift, tracking fails, or archery in that game's almost impossible, because when you're pulling a bow back, you're obscuring one of the tracking balls with your other hand, and then you just hand floats off into the distance. There was none of that there. So you could do really precise things, like you could use your finger to switch the fire button on the assault rifle.
Oh yeah.
There were tiny little laser sights that you could find on the floor that you can attach to some weapons like the pistol, the bow, the assault rifle. You just put it on the gun and it snaps into place. But then you have to get in with your finger and boop, turn it on for it to go. So there's all these tiny little dexterous things that you can now do with the Oculus, with the Sense controllers that you couldn't do with the Move, without, I don't know, throwing your Move at the walls first.
Yeah, exactly. Wow, that stuff's really cool then. So there's a lot going on with this, and it does seem to have lived up to kind of what I had hoped it would be. It seems comfortable. The controllers seem solid. The games, I hope that, I guess the big hope here is that this will cause larger scale, more impressive VR games to be made again.
That's what I'm hoping.
The Quest has become so popular, but it's not a very powerful platform, and there's a lot of shovelware on it. PC VR has kind of suffered as a result, and I'm hoping that this will bring back games that'll be made for PSVR2 and also PC, presumably, that actually target the higher end hardware again.
I'm right behind you there. PC VR has been stagnating a bit recently. Like, there's been nothing made for the PlayStation VR 1 because everyone's been beavering away on PlayStation VR 2 stuff, I guess. In terms of, as you said, the Oculus Quest developers, they're making quick, easy, simple headset games because they sell well and they're probably easier, quicker, and cheaper to develop than the big AAA ones that we used to see. And also, Mark Zuckerberg, with one fell swoop, made VR uncool by creating the metaverse. Like,
he sure did.
That whole thing was just like, oh my God, how have you just instantly made VR uncool? So I'm hoping PlayStation VR 2 makes VR cool again.
Because, I mean, that almost happened anyway with Palmer Luckey and the cover on the beach.
Oh God, yeah. Oh, that had been. I blanked that out in my mind. The cover of that. But yeah, the PlayStation VR 2. It's going to depend on price and availability, a lot of it. But as far as I'm concerned, as far as I'm concerned, from a technical novice's standpoint, this is so easy to use. So new people to VR just going to be able to plug and play all these like fantastic games. It's comfortable and light, so it's not going to be hot and sweaty or uncomfortable to wear. Hopefully, I did only play it in like 30-minute bursts. I didn't get like an extended amount of time with it.
Right.
I play my Oculus Rift and stuff for like 2 hours at a time, and you can start to feel your face reddening and stuff. So
absolutely.
I can't say whether or not extended periods of time will make it more uncomfortable. I presume it would, but short, sharp bursts, it was fine. And it was just nice to see some really good-looking, exciting new experiences coming out that weren't mods, because recently all I've been excited about in VR has been mods. They've been keeping VR alive for me.
All right, well, Ian, I think we've talked quite enough already. That was a very insightful section.
As you can tell, I like talking about VR.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for joining me on this.
Thank you so much for having me on the illustrious Digital Foundry Direct.
Of course. And so, Rich, back to you.
Okay, well, thanks for that, John. Fascinating report there. And I just can't wait to see the headset. Any reaction from you there, Alex, on PSVR 2?
John, obviously, and Ian covered a heck of a lot there, but I guess just my reactions are some of the titles look really, really interesting. I think Resident Evil Village was the most interesting thing that I saw. I watched through Ian's coverage from Eurogamer, which used a lot of apparently direct feed footage and stuff, and it looked really, really good. It seemed like a very different game from the base Resident Evil Village in terms of interaction with the world and the generic like sense of presence, which it's not that surprising considering how they seem to have, ever since Resident Evil 7, been so focused on the first person experience, and with that game starting off as a VR title, but they did a really good job.
The thing about Resident Evil 7, though, is notoriously it was a gamepad game only, right? So when you played it in PSVR, you got the immersion, but it played exactly the same as the pancake mode.
Pancake.
But Resident Evil Village seems to have been completely redesigned, and it's now more akin to like Half-Life Alyx or Boneworks or something, where like items have physicality, and even things like the weapons, they're not attached to your hand, right? So if you let off the grip, they fall to the ground. which it's a small thing, but it makes it feel more like you're manipulating real objects in the world, and I think that's really cool.
Yeah, that did look really great. The Horizon one, beyond looking visually interesting in just the way the Horizon games look, didn't seem like much of an experience that would attract me, other than maybe just to load it up and look at it. It did look a lot like of a lot of those VR demos you've played before in the past, in terms of like what you're doing in it, the interactivity, and other things like that.
Yeah.
I guess it's the one thing
Baby's
that about
first
it is
VR.
Baby's first VR. I don't know if this was just because of Ian's feed, but I did notice that the Resident Evil Village VR pop-out window that they used to record from was 60 FPS there, but it did seem like not 60 for the Horizon footage. I don't know if that was just because of something like there, or if it's actually some interesting difference we're going to see when PSVR 2 comes out.
No, the footage they sent, the B-roll they sent was actually just 30 FPS, right, Rich? It was
okay.
like 4K 30
Whatever.
for some reason, but according to Ian himself, it was actually much higher than that B-roll.
Yeah, I imagine it is.
Yeah, the thing about that though was the movement stuff. Did you catch that? How like when fighting the Thunderjaw, for instance, you don't have free movement. You move in a circle around the enemy, right? So you can move left or right, but you can't move in or out, and you're just basically circling around this thing and taking it out, which
I don't know about
pretty
that.
limiting.
Yeah.
They also added those gesture controls, which he talked about in that segment.
They look funny.
Which really weird, but yeah, we'll see. I'm still
Yeah.
willing to give it a shot, obviously, because. But it might be, it probably does make sense if you've not really played this type of thing in VR, you're not used to the hand control stuff, this could be a good first experience, which makes me almost think they should probably package this in with the PSVR. They won't, but feels like a good pack-in title.
I think you kind of need a pack-in title with a PSVR experience, right? You need something out of the box, don't you?
Yeah, something like the Astros, whatever, demo.
Rescue,
like
Rescue Ball.
Astros, whatever.
But other than that, I guess I'm just kind of curious about how PSVR 2, how we're going to be ending up capturing it and what the capture setup looks like. Because obviously PSVR had its little capture window thing. And, representing that to an audience on YouTube is going to be maybe a challenge. I hope it turns out really well.
We've done this before and with VR coverage, and I think as long as you can kind of showcase what makes it interesting visually and gameplay wise, most people are like, whatever. Like you just explain this is what it looks like. Or like, remember when we did the Doom 3 VR thing and I did the green screen setup? You could do that as well. I mean, there's ways.
Okay, fair enough. Any final thoughts on VR, John? Because I think out of the three of us, you're the most excited for this, right?
Yeah, and obviously I'm very excited for this specific hardware, but I'm also excited that VR is coming back to non-mobile chipsets, because the rise of Oculus Quest has meant that most VR development has shifted to these super low-end SoC like mobile systems, and that has had an impact. Like the games on Quest are just a lot less ambitious. Like after stuff like Half-Life Alyx, it feels like PC VR just kind of went away. So my hope here is that with PSVR being powered by PS5, it not only means good PSVR content, but hopefully also means that PC VR will make a return. Where it's like, you can't do these on the Quest, but you could do it on the PC. So I'm just hoping for more higher end VR experiences again.
Absolutely. Okay. And with that, let's move on to our next news topic. We're going to be sticking with Sony for this one because obviously it's been TGS week. We did actually get a state of play, not an exceptionally long one as such, but there were plenty of interesting titles to discuss there. God of War, Ragnarok, Rise of the Ronin, Like a Dragon-ish, so many games. Tekken 8, wow.
Yeah.
John, what caught your eye there?
Honestly, the first thing that caught my eye was Tekken 8, which they showed a real-time sequence captured from the game. Harada himself confirmed that. So, I gotta say, like, that team and Namco in general, they've been using Unreal Engine now for a generation, and they've managed to retain their extremely, like, strong art design and just, like, visual identity within Unreal Engine, and you just have these games that just look phenomenal. I mean, Tekken 8 is just awesome looking, I think. Like, I was imagining showing that to myself back in 1994 or 5 when you see the first Tekken. And it's like, nah, this is what it's going to look like in however many years. And it's just, unbelievable. But, no gameplay yet. Well, a little bit, I guess, since they say it's from the story mode, and based on Tekken 7, they're going to have those cinematic sequences within the fights as well. So it's, but yeah, I don't know. That looked good. What else was? They did show Ryuga Gotoku Ishin, which is a remake of the PS3 game that never came to the West. And this one, I think they announced that it's switching to Unreal Engine, and they had some kind of weird PR blurb about how like it brings out the textures and
unlocks textures, actually.
Unlocked high-res textures or something. I'm like, what?
They've just been locked away.
Yeah, they were there the whole time, but now they can do it.
What do you make of that, actually, John? Because obviously they've been relying on their own in-house technology since the year dot. Now they're moving away from it. And is this a case where actually it is actually going to enable the developers to do more? Was it the case that the Dragon engine was kind of quite limiting in this generation?
I don't think so. I mean, the Dragon engine notoriously isn't the most performant. I will give it that, but it accomplishes exactly what they needed to in their games. And looking at this footage, like seeing that this is Unreal now, it doesn't look any different, right? So you can see that they've retained their artistic design. That was not an engine limitation thing. This is just what they do. And it makes me worry now, like what happens if you want to play this on PC? Are you going to get PSO stuttering now?
Probably.
Yakuza?
I mean, I don't trust any developer at this point to fix that issue. So
Japanese developer, first Unreal Engine 4 game after working with their own tech for all those years. Like it seems dicey. So, and their reasoning was like, oh, we don't want to invest in upgrading the Dragon engine further for next gen targets, which that was, I guess Dragon engine was already the result of those upgrades when it first appeared in the 6th game. And I'm a little sad that they're not going to be continuing this. And it feels like, again, we're losing kind of an identity here.
Yeah, I think the Dragon engine, when they did upgrade it, started to look like a modern, it started to look like modern games that you'd see in the Xbox One and PlayStation 4 era. It wasn't doing anything particularly different, but it still managed to work really well for the games they made. And I know you're saying like they were kind of heavy for the games that they were, but like I think we've seen on the releases on Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5 and subsequently PC as well too, that like if you just turn down the settings a little bit, they still run at like 60 FPS pretty well, like at 1440p or whatever.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think that's really reasonable given how the games look. So I know they have like a slightly bad reputation, but I do think they're pretty good looking games, and I'm really saddened to see them not continuing the technology on forward. I'm not sure how much of a full upgrade Unreal Engine 4 is versus a side grade in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
unless they're taking advantage of like some of the more later gen Unreal Engine 4 things that have released. So maybe it is also just for them about attracting talent and making sure they're not spending a bunch of money on R&D in the future and things like that, which I get. But once again, I'm saddened. So
I agree.
We'll see.
That's a bummer.
Yeah.
It is interesting that they commented that the reason they finally decided to bring Ishin to the West and do this is because of Ghost of Tsushima. Because during the PS3 generation, they seemingly thought that a game set in ancient Japan, or like at least a Japanese setting, I guess it's not ancient Japan, but was like not something that would succeed in the West. And then they decided weird. Actually, Ghost was successful enough and popular in Japan, no less, that they're like, okay, now we can do this.
Like, weren't they also not wanting to release the series in general on Switch for some other reason that is not necessarily so great? Like when you think about it,
the thing I actually wonder, and some other folks have mentioned this, was like Sega Sega and Switch, like they have a certain image there now, and it almost makes me wonder if like they're afraid of like they don't want Switch owners and parents to associate Sega with this series, maybe like some kind of weird image thing, that, or they're still crushed by the failure of the Wii U version of Yakuza, which was a complete flop. So, but I don't think that's logical given the success of it now. So very, very weird. As an aside, before we talk about the other content, I do want to again compliment them for their extreme honesty with regards to labeling what each trailer was, even going so far as to be like gameplay portions captured on PS5, cutscenes captured on PC, stuff like that. Like that amount of granularity in the text there was kind of surprising and cool. That's great.
It's what you want to see.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, what particularly amused me was the trailer for the God of War DualShock.
Oh yeah,
where basically every sort of game excerpt in there was just not actual gameplay.
Yeah, they kept cutting in and out with that. Like, nope, this isn't gameplay.
Not gameplay. But then you sort of cut to the controller, back to the game, not gameplay. But, you know, I actually really enjoy that honesty, and it's not as if we didn't get to see a lot of God of War in there. Maybe we should talk about that next.
Sure.
Yeah,
Or maybe we should stick on the Japanese theme.
Oh, yeah.
Because Rise of the Ronin was looking like an interesting title, right?
That's going to be interesting. I mean, John, you probably want to say a lot about this, but I think in general, from what I've played of Neo, I think they're really high quality combat games. Like if you like games with like super in-depth combat, they're really great for that. I think that they kind of just lose me a little bit on like the upgrade path of like loot stuff is the only thing that like maybe bothers me in those games a little bit, especially in the second one. But if they kind of keep that style of combat and attention to detail for that combat in a more open world setting, it could actually be very successful in terms of, you know, like what they do for games. I don't know. What do you think, John?
That's my thought. I was kind of wondering if, you know, Neo was born out of the popularities of Dark Souls, right? I would say. Combined with, I mean, what always made Neo interesting is it has that lineage of Ninja Gaiden with Dark Souls. And I look at this and I'm wondering, okay, is this then like their take on the Elden Ring formula now? Or it's like they're adapting their Souls-like / Ninja Gaiden-like combat into a larger setting? I mean, the setting is obviously different than that, but there's a lot of potential here for something interesting, I would say. And yeah, like these games are very technical in terms of gameplay design. And I would say, though, you can still see a lot of the tech limitations, if you will, beneath the surface here. So you still know it's the same engine, but I would say it looks a lot better than, say, Stranger of Paradise.
Way better.
Much better than
Paradise. Yeah. And just like, I would say like artistically too. Stranger of Paradise to me just looks a very weird looking game.
It is weird.
It is a weird looking game. But this one actually looked very cool. And I guess like it'll be interesting to see how they design it because like they've done so much, like each level is very carefully designed. There's a monster placed here. There's an enemy placed here. But here in an open world, there's typically, other than maybe missions that are more linear, it's a little bit hard to balance that out. They did an Elden Ring to a certain degree, so I'm wondering how they're going to balance that here. Visually, though, like you said, it really looks like their engine in a lot of ways, just not as bad as stuff as we've seen in Stranger of Paradise, but more good-looking. Like I think Neo 2 is a really good-looking title. In general, it has its quirks, its performance quirks, and its visual quirks, but you know, it's in general looks okay. You know, hopefully they have TAA this time.
Yeah,
good TAA.
that's but they did have DLSS on PC, right? So
yeah,
but
they did.
On console, we can hope for TAA.
Yeah.
I also want to mention Stellar Blade, just as like a weird, wild-looking visual design, like the world they showed there. It seems to be a first-party Sony game now. Like I guess maybe it always was. Like it says Sony Computer Entertainment or Interactive, whatever, presents that. So it seems to be published by them. But the performance was rather wobbly, I would say, in all that footage, unfortunately. But the actual visual design is pretty impressive. I would, especially that scene early on in the trailer when they're kind of flying into that weird city within like a vehicle, and then landing on that launch pad. Again, frame rate's really unsteady there, but it looks visually like interesting, I would say. Although I will say that the logo, that they revealed the new name, Stellar Blade, and the logo itself is nearly illegible, like the stellar part. Like I was looking at that, trying to parse, like what is it? It's like S something.
Yeah, that's good.
What about Exoprimal? You added that to the list, right, John?
Yeah,
Exoprimal.
Exoprimal.
Oh, you added it, Alex.
Yeah,
it doesn't suck.
It doesn't suck. It gave me super hardcore Lost Planet 2 vibes. I don't know why.
Oh, I know what you mean.
Yeah, I guess it's just kind of the design. I think technically in the trailer, there's a lot of really interesting looking things visually, but I noticed how, like you were saying with the last trailer, John, you just mentioned, really interestingly that it was so uneven performance wise. There was like straight 60 scenes and then scenes that were like, looked like 10 to 20. It was really weird. I don't know if that was just the trailer being edited in a hasty way, but I don't think they're showing off different versions. They're just showing a lot of work in progress
Okay,
stuff off.
that was not in the direct. That was in the Capcom stream. I was trying to remember where I watched that, and I was like, wait, I saw that, but yeah.
I wanted to add that in just because I actually like games that have dinosaurs in general. I didn't know where to throw it in here. The only thing that worried me about the title, the stuff that they showed off, is at the end they mentioned about upgrading your suit or something like that.
Oh no.
And I'm wondering if it's going to be a bit Warframe-like in that aspect, in terms of gameplay, where it's all about, you know, like kind of dungeoning and getting loot and upgrading your exoframe kind of stuff, which is the only thing I'm worried about, because I think we need more like co-op dinosaur shooting games, but not if they're just kind of around loot generation.
Yeah,
loot,
we don't want
securing. That's the stuff I'm not so cool on. But the other stuff, it looks like just like straight fun. You're just shooting dinosaurs. I think that looks really cool. Yeah.
I'm into that. What about Pacific Drive? So do you remember that one? So this one actually really captured my imagination. It's a concept I'd never even thought of, but it seems to be the game is based on you're escaping some sort of like world-ending anomaly, and it's just you and your station wagon full of like weird technology. And it's just like, I get the impression it's like, oh, you break down, you get out, scrounge, try to repair your car, get back on the road, all while this like thing is constantly approaching you and the world around you is falling apart. And it looked really like, it's a cool concept that I don't think we've ever seen before. Like this idea of just you in this car are just trying to survive, and you're just escaping something that's constantly moving towards you.
There's another game, I don't know if it has similar lineage to this, called Beware. I had to just Google it because I thought I saw this concept before, where it's you driving. It's a driving horror game with a similar kind of look
so maybe
to it.
It has been done
Maybe
before.
it is. Yeah, but I'm wondering if like it has the game that I have played before. I have not tried out Beware. I don't really know much about it other than it visually, but I have played something like my summer car, my Finnish car, or whatever it's called.
My summer car.
That's a game where it's all about just driving and taking care of your kind of jalopy.
Yep.
And I think if it shares any sort of lineage with that, where it has light simulation elements as a part of it, it could be really compelling. Because, you know, a lot of survival horror games are actually like about doing very technical things to survive. It's not about just engaging in combat. It's about avoiding combat and resource management. So that translated to a car game, that's a pretty cool idea.
I agree.
I just want to skip ahead for a moment, since we're sort of vaguely still in Capcom area. There was the announcement that the Resident Evil 4 remake is going to be coming to PlayStation 4, which is a bit of a surprise. And we have this question from supporter Modron. Capcom has just announced that the Resident Evil 4 remake will be releasing on PS4 as well as PS5, but notably made no mention of the Xbox One alongside the series console. As the cross-gen period appears to be slowly winding down, do you think this is something we might see more of? And I think the answer to that is probably yes. Simply because the installed base of Xbox One is significantly lower than PlayStation 4. So if you do have to accommodate a last gen system, PS4 kind of makes a bit more sense, especially for a game like Resident Evil 4, which you'd expect it to do well in Japan, but the PlayStation 5 hasn't done well in Japan.
Exactly.
What do you make of this, John?
I think you're exactly right, and it's probably why it was announced at TGS as well, is that PS5 it's struggling in Japan. They can't buy them. The price is insanely high. It's not a good situation right now. And I assume that Capcom basically did the math and determined, all right, well, we can't afford to do it this way. So they've opted to make a PS4 version as well. Which, hey, I mean, we know how that engine works on PS4. I wouldn't say the remake looks that much visually different from their other recent games like Village. Like, it's very much that ballpark, right? So it's not that much of a stretch. I posed the question yesterday, and I I guess logically it doesn't make sense marketing wise, but I was like, what if they just did like an Xbox One X version and just ignore the Xbox One? Because who wants to work on that thing? But the Xbox One X, I feel, gets underrepresented just because it's a better machine than the PS4 and the Pro, right? It just kind of feels like it's been forgotten, which is a shame because it's a great console. But I assume that the install base of One X plus the fact that they don't really seem to provide a way to only target One X would make that not feasible. So
yeah, I think it's actually a requirement from
Yeah.
the platform holder that you have to, if it's Xbox One X, it has to be Xbox One as well.
I mean, it's the same with the PS4 Pro, right? You can't just do a
Yeah.
Pro version of a game. So I understand. It's just, it sucks for Xbox One X owners because I think Xbox One X could still provide a sharper experience than the Series S in this game. Maybe at a lower frame rate, but at a higher res, probably.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Let's return to the final part of the state of play, which was God of War Ragnarok. I mean, I guess we're all really looking forward to this one. Footage did look phenomenal. Just exciting times ahead. It's great to have a really big AAA heavy hitter coming this year because it's been pretty threadbare so far. But at the same time, it was kind of like, yes, this is exactly what I want. Few surprises. I don't know. What do you think, John?
I mean, it looks exactly like the sequel to God of War 2018.
As you would expect. Right?
As you'd
Yeah.
expect, but you can tell, like, okay, this was always being built for the PS4 primarily, and they're just doing a PS5 version of it as well. And I think it's going to be a very attractive game. The art direction is strong. It looks less visually or technically impressive compared to like all of Insomniac's PS5 stuff, the Demon Souls remake, even Horizon 2. Like, it's not quite on that level, but it's still attractive enough that I'd say that's fine. Like, it's a beautiful looking game, and I'm happy to see, like, this trailer finally shows, like, okay, you can tell, like, they're getting ready to ship this thing, right? Because it's only late in development where you can really make a trailer like this, where you show all those different scenes with the different types of environments, right? Like, early on, they usually just show like one or two things because it's not far enough along in development to make a trailer like that. But yeah, this does suggest, there's a lot going on. The only thing I'm wondering is, I don't know, have they confirmed anything about the performance mode options this time? Because this trailer is 30 FPS. So
That was the one thing I noticed, as well as one other thing. But yeah.
what was the other thing?
What was
the
the
other
other
thing
thing?
I was wondering is
Don't
that
leave
they
us
showed
hanging.
this boss that was made of a bunch of particles, and I was thinking like PS4 running that. I don't know. I'm curious if they're gonna change the PS4 setup for this game to not be 1080p 30, but maybe start using like dynamic res or something like that. Because there were some scenes in there where I was thinking like, it's a little bit hard even at 1080p to imagine the PS4 doing some of the visual complexity at hand here. Because, like if you go back in time to God of War, really good looking game, but like some of the places were like very purposefully built to be running on like a base PS4 in terms of just like how open or wide or how much complexity there was. And that fight to me looked really intense, just like a lot of alpha particles right in the front of the screen. And I was just like, how will PS4 do that? So I'm curious now if the engine setup there is going to be different, and we're going to see kind of like a Horizon situation where the PS4 version still looks good, but it is obviously, it's like a slightly visually degraded game in comparison to the last outing.
I think Horizon's a good comparison. Actually,
Yeah.
where this looks very much of a Horizon 2 style game visually, which is to say a nice improvement over the original. Not world shattering, but I think if we actually go back and compare to that first game and you look at this PS4 version, I think the differences should probably become a lot more clear. They're just able to push out fidelity further and kind of step away from some of the limitations of that older hardware.
For sure.
So I actually do
Yeah.
look forward to making that comparison because generational comparisons are still interesting, I think.
Do you think it'll be a 60 FPS mode? Surely they can't ship without it.
I don't think that they're going to ship it at 30 only. I was hoping it would be high res in 60, but I suspect it'll be like a 1440-ish mode,
You think
maybe
they'll
at
do that?
60. I don't know. Like, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that would be interesting, but I was just curious because, they shipped that patch, which was checkerboard at 4K. I was curious if they maybe still use checkerboarding, because PS5 still supports checkerboarding.
Yeah,
I don't know.
mean, Horizon 1 used checkerboarding as well, right? And then they kind of,
Yep.
well, so I don't know. I guess I'm kind of expecting a split like Horizon 2, actually. Sorry, Horizon the Forbidden West. It's not Horizon 2. I always say that, and Richard's like, it's not 2, even though there's two little dashes in the title.
John, you gotta let it go.
I gotta let it go.
Every time we talk about Horizon, you talk about the little 2 in the logo.
It's a 2.
It has to be.
It's a 2. Okay, fair enough. I think that's all we've got to say about Sony at the moment. Let's move on to the Nintendo Direct. Again, a huge amount of... In fact, the Nintendo Direct was twice the length of the Sony State of Play. They crammed in a lot of stuff there. Where do we begin? John, where do we begin? There's just so much to talk about. Have to be quite judicious about what we talk about because we could be here all day.
Yeah, so we should start with the big heavy hitter. The Tears of the Kingdom, Tears of War. Start with that. So Breath of the Wild 2 officially got named The Legend of Zelda
Tears
of
of the Kingdom. A week after Queen Elizabeth II.
Yeah, now we understand the whole weird stuff with Nintendo UK and like how they showed this maybe. Like what?
What a joke.
Yeah, they decided not to stream it to the UK, but you just went to one of the other streams
any
anyway.
other site. It's like, okay.
Due to a title. Oh my God.
I mean, this looked good to me. I think it's going to be a great game as before. There's certain iconography in that trailer that makes me hope that they really are bringing proper Zelda style dungeons to this open world format. And
Yeah.
I also like this whole like environment set in the sky above the map below. Like that's a really cool aesthetic and potentially really fun and interesting to explore. Like I just like verticality. Technically it looks like the expected evolution of the first game, still targeting the regular Switch. Although with a date like May, you're like, did they just reveal the next Switch release date too? In keeping with their tradition of dual releases.
Releasing the next one.
Yeah.
It's a good point, John. One thing I noticed is that, so last time we talked about this, I was saying like, oh, the clouds are something that is pretty interesting to see on Switch. And people in the comments were like, Alex, I can't believe you said that. They're just billboard clouds. Well, they can't just be billboard clouds, people, because if you jump through a billboard, it just like flips around while you're jumping through it. And the character in this trailer jumps through a cloud. So they're obviously doing some semi-volumetric thing there. Otherwise, it just doesn't work. So that was one thing I wanted to point out for all you keyboard warriors. But the rest of the trailer did look really good.
This is sweet revenge, isn't it, Alex? Vindication.
Sweet revenge.
This is my revenge. But the rest of the trailer did look really good. One thing I kind of want to flip over just to one other title after this is because this trailer did show off anti-aliasing. Their last game, even when it came out, had anti-aliasing on Switch. And I even think on the Wii U, some form of anti-aliasing. It was okay enough. But a kind of trailer I want to move on to after this was, I actually like the Pikmin games.
You already moved on then.
I'm moving on. Pikmin
John,
4,
your opinion is worthless.
Pikmin 4 looks, they don't show anything other than the visuals. And the visuals, I think, looked very, very Pikmin with that really nice bokeh in the background, like close camera, zooming in on mundane world objects in a garden. But I want to point out very succinctly that this is a Nintendo. Who develops this title, John?
Nintendo. It's internal.
Nintendo. It's internal. So they actually have what looks to be like TAA here. If not that, it was like super sampled because there was zero aliasing in the title.
Or maybe it's the next Switch.
Or maybe it's next Switch. I don't know. But, that was interesting to see because there's so many Nintendo titles. John just covered one that just don't have anti-aliasing. And here, seeing super sweet anti-aliasing was great to see. It's something that this art style, I really think, needs. It needs to look a little bit more perfect, I would say, than obviously you just looked at Splatoon 3. That game's 60 FPS. It makes a bit of sense that they would skimp on that.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Pikmin. Tears of the Kingdom. I mean, there's not much to say more about Tears given the short nature of the trailer.
I've got a question for you about Tears.
Okay.
Which is obviously when we saw the last trailer, it was looking somewhat pristine. There were questions about whether it was running on actual Switch hardware. Uh, the reaction from one outlet was that we said it was too big for Switch.
Is this too big for Switch?
What do you make of the image quality this time around? Because I wasn't thinking that this isn't something that Switch can do anymore.
I mean, image quality looked good for Switch, I would say, but I don't know. It's hard. It's still hard for me to judge from this direct trailer.
Yeah, 1080p trailer.
Yeah, I need to look closer at it, but obviously it's gonna have to ship on the Switch anyway. So
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else in the Nintendo Direct that caught your eye? I mean, there was, again, so many big games in there.
Octopath Traveler 2 got announced, and I like the first game was great, but it's actually less about the fact that it's announced and more that it sounds like it's going to be day and date on like Steam and PS5 as well and PS4.
Wow.
But weirdly, like they're skipping Xbox this time, which I don't
know what
get
that's about.
because Octopath Traveler 1 was Switch and Xbox. And now the second one, it didn't come out on PlayStation. Now the second one is PlayStation and Switch and PC, I guess, but no Xbox. Like what? That's baffling to me, and I hope that changes just because it would suck to play an original game like that and then be told, nah, the sequel's not coming to your system. That's not cool. But the game itself looks great. I like that visual design. One of our patrons, I think, joked that if it's coming to PS5 and PC, that must mean it's instead of HD 2D, it's UHD 2D.
Yeah, I'm sometimes split a little bit on the HD 2D look, just in terms of post-processing. Like, I think depth of field looks good, but I'm not a big fan of like that burnt balloon look.
It's a bit heavy.
It's a bit heavy to me. So like if there was one thing I would love if they added in this game, the option to turn off bloom and not depth of field. Depth of field is probably integral to how they even design the scenes, but like the bloom is one thing I could do without.
Yeah, I can agree with that. So there was that. Radiant Silvergun got announced for Switch, which is cool. You know, it looks like a nice port of the 360 version, I believe. So
Xbox Live.
That's great to see. Bayonetta 3 was shown in more detail, but that comes out very soon, so we'll probably be talking about that when it hits. One big thing to discuss, well, actually, there's two more things that I want to talk about. One, Tales of Symphonia was announced as in remastered form, they call it. And this is just the biggest crock of, out there, I would say. Because, so, this is a game developed for GameCube, runs at 60 frames per second in its original form. Then they did what I always thought was one of the shoddiest ports to PS2. Like most PS2 RPGs are 60 FPS as well, or at least 60 FPS in battle. This port was 30, and it's not even like an especially amazing looking game. So I think that original port work was bad. But for whatever reason, because it had extra content, I guess, that became the basis of this game going forward. So when it got remastered on PS3 and PC, 30 FPS, and now this new version, again, 30 FPS. And I just feel like if you're reselling this product and not willing to do the work to fix this, I think that's not good. Like they could figure this out. I understand, like, maybe it's not easy. It's clearly very difficult if you're working from that original base, but they should have gone the extra mile, found some kind of solution for this, or just not re-released it at all. I think
I agree. To me, it's like a Blu-ray made from a VHS transfer. That's what it feels like.
Yeah. I mean, look, like
where you're using the wrong base.
Yeah. Square lost the source code and all this stuff for the Kingdom Hearts games, right? That didn't stop them from rebuilding them at 60 FPS, in high quality for those new versions. They still figured it out. I feel like Namco should have done the same here. And it's just a real shame that it seems unfixable, and it's like, I think they would have to rebuild a lot because Chaldean actually worked on the PC version trying to fix it and was unable to unlock the frame rate. It's just, the game just falls apart if you go over 30 FPS. I don't know why. That doesn't. That's really
That
weird.
doesn't seem right, considering the first time it was released,
Yeah.
it was 60. It seems like they purposely did that almost when they did the original release. So, ugh.
Just wild. So that's a bummer. But the other thing we should talk about is GoldenEye. So
Yeah.
that got announced for Switch and Xbox. And unfortunately, it's neither of the cool things that it could have been. So we don't know the reason why these other versions didn't happen. But first, there's the XBLA version that we've played that was leaked from Rare, which was awesome. Let you switch between new and old graphics, 60 FPS, 4x MSAA on the 360. It was a really nice version. That's what I had hoped for, but you're not getting that. And then Stephen Kick also revealed on Twitter that they had been in sort of like negotiations to remake this stuff, remake GoldenEye, Night Dive style.
Night Dive Studios, right?
Yeah, and well, someone somewhere, we don't know, turned them down, and that got
Blofeld.
What's that?
Blofeld.
Yeah, Blofeld. Yes.
Someone,
yes. Unfortunately, that didn't work out, so that is not a thing either. So what we have looks like some sort of enhanced emulation stuff. No visual enhancements that I could see. All the flaws you get with the typical emulated presentation in this game, including the broken font rendering. I mean, it seems like they're improving performance, which
on Xbox at least.
And Switch. Apparently also this was possible anyway with just emulation due to the way the game's timing worked. Like you could already do this on PC and get it up to 60 with mouse control if you wanted. So they're just kind of adapting that. The weird thing here is that it only has online play on Switch.
Yeah, what's that about? It's just utterly bizarre.
No,
isn't that just because of the emulation system on Switch allows for it? Basically?
Yeah, but you'd think that they could also implement that on Xbox.
You're right. I don't know.
I mean, people, multiplayers where you go to Xbox for multiplayer, you don't go to Nintendo for multiplayer. Well, online multiplayer, you go for local multiplayer, not online. So it's weirdly reversed, I think. Like, what do you think of this, Alex? Like, how did this strike you?
I like this. I mean, I'm actually just really saddened because this is going to be the only way it's going to be officially released for a long time, if ever again. And they're just putting it on the systems that they're putting it on. I think it is really weird that they're including it as a part of, I understand why, but just Rare Replay and not like saying, oh, we could, like if this were on like the store, the Microsoft store or Steam, it would sell so well. So I'm a little bit saddened that it is coming as a part of Rare Replay. And because Rare Replay, for people who don't know, it's this really cool collection of Rare games from N64 up to the like Xbox 360 era even of games. And, it's all re-released in like 2015 and it was never released on PC, unfortunately. So that it being locked there to me is really sad because even if it comes out in this like semi-neutered way, or like it's not as good as it could have been, I would have loved to have played this on PC. So I'm really sad about that.
Showing up in Game Pass as well, apparently. But I'm not sure if they're referring
PC
to Rare
Game Pass?
Replay, but they did mention Game Pass. The thing I'm unsure of is, obviously I own the disc version of Rare Replay, but they didn't mention this as like a free upgrade for it. So I hope it's not just the digital version that's there.
That's interesting. I don't know about that.
It's more that they just didn't mention the disc because the disc itself is out of print, so it's not an official way to buy it anymore. So maybe that's why it didn't get mentioned.
That's a good point. I don't know about that. One thing I think maybe when we did that original video, John, of showing the Xbox Live leaked version or whatever that was from Rare, I think there was a Twitter kind of argumentation going around that this game is actually really bad or something like that, which I just kind of wanted to just really mention is that I don't know if I really agree with that sentiment. No. I think it's actually like if you look at like the way the levels structure, like between like agent and 007 and secret agent mode, like how it like builds up the amount of objectives you get, and then there's like timers and it's about like beating a level really quickly, almost like a speedrunner style at one point. It is a very interesting game design. Obviously, it's not your Call of Duty these days, or it's not even Doom, but it is very interesting in its own right. So I don't think people who play this game anew are going to think it's bad. I think they're just going to think it's very different than modern shooters is all.
Yeah, I kind of feel like anybody saying that just didn't experience it at the time or don't understand what it was trying to do. Because you mentioned it's a very unique shooter that really kind of made some of the decisions they made were obviously done for console playability, but the mission structure thing, that's something I only remember that showed up in Thief after GoldenEye. But that was a very unique approach to it, and just learning these levels and the style of play that they offered was pretty special, I think. And it was even in I actually feel like my appreciation for it has grown. Like, I did enjoy it at the time, but I also was a little bit of a, weirdly enough, a PC gaming snob during that specific period. So I was like, I got Half-Life over here. Who's playing GoldenEye anymore? That's ancient. But over time, like, I've come to realize, like, oh wait, GoldenEye really was super well designed, very smartly made game that did a lot of impressive stuff. And it definitely deserves appreciation for that.
I do remember playing it through. I remember, going to the missions that occurred beyond the actual GoldenEye storyline. I thought that was great.
Yeah.
I guess my concern with this remaster is the adherence to the original version, because typically N64 assets in modern resolutions don't look great.
No.
I'd have preferred an option to do original pixel graphics with like super sampling and like, a nice CRT filter or something,
That would
try to
be
make it
great.
look, because N64 games especially, like if you view them on a CRT, they actually look pretty cool. Like they have a really smooth, slick look to them that emulators don't really replicate traditionally. So I actually think just displaying N64 games in high res makes them look a lot worse than they normally do.
John, do you want to tackle this next news story? This one's just come out of the blue, I think.
Yeah.
I know nothing about it.
So this had been rumored for a while, but I watched the whole presentation this morning. Konami announced Genso Suikoden I and II getting HD remastered. So these are two seminal 2D RPGs released for the original PlayStation back in the 90s. They are somewhat beloved, I would say, and Suikoden II is considered like it's one of the better RPGs on that system, I'd say. It's certainly beloved by many, but the series kind of died off. There was a PSP original game as well as Suikoden 2 1 and 2 on PSP, and then there was Suikoden 5, and then the whole series kind of just disappeared. And then they reemerged and was like, hey, we're doing HD remasters of this, and by and large, I would say they actually look good. Like if I throw this over here into the chat for you, Alex, you can take a couple shots, and I think that looks noticeably better than, like, say, Square's recent attempts with like the pixel remasters. There's definitely some weird, you have the lower resolution pixel sprites with the higher res backgrounds, but I still think that's a better choice than trying to do like weird distorted high res sprites that could have happened.
Especially, if like this has a PC release, you can probably mitigate this to a certain degree just by having the game run at a different resolution, which you can sometimes do. So, yeah.
So I really like what they're doing here. The UI is not the best, again, as is common with these HD remasters for some reason, but it's not as bad as Square's work on this front, so that's good. But the actual games themselves look really, really nice. And it's a great way to re-release this for the public in a way, because if you wanted to buy a copy of Suikoden 2, the English version, it's expensive. It's like, I don't know, it's in like, last I remember, $200, $300, $400 range. So it's not an easy one to get anymore. This is a great way to do it, and it's been announced for PS4, Xbox One, Switch, and the PC. There's even the Steam page up right now, so that's great news.
That's good.
But yeah, so there's that. They're also they also announced in the show there's a sort of a poetic, like a symphonic thing happening in October, like a concert for it. There's some weird merch showing up at an Akihabara store with like some of those little acrylic figures. Like, I was just surprised to see Konami itself kind of going all out with a press conference and actually talking about a game that people care about again, because they don't do that. They haven't really done that for a while. So maybe this is the beginning of something new, or they're back to actually releasing stuff again, even if this is just, a remaster.
Final news story before we move on. Uncharted Legacy of Thieves collection finally has a release date for PC. It's October the 19th, and presumably you're rather excited about this, Alex.
Yeah, I'm excited to take this one under the microscope when the time comes around. I just also wanted to comment in general how this was originally releasing I swear we thought it was going to be January-ish last year, wasn't it? Like at the beginning of this year.
Well,
I mean, sorry, right?
We thought it would be appearing sort of not too long after the PlayStation version.
Right. That's what we really thought, and
Yeah.
that didn't happen. For a while I was speculating internally just with myself because it's handled by Iron Galaxy, and Iron Galaxy is notorious, unfortunately, for a couple of ports on PC, Arkham Knight among them, which is not a good port. So I was a little bit worried that they bit off more than they could chew, and or they were having issues and all these things like that. But it is coming out now, and based upon the specs at least put out, it actually seems extremely reasonable in terms of performance. There's no surprises there. Something like 1440p 60 on the rig that they put out there, which is like a Ryzen 5700 XT and or an RTX 2070, is actually the performance you would really expect based upon the fact that the PlayStation 5 BC version of that game is 1440p 60. This is a BC game, right? Isn't it?
What? No.
It isn't? Oh, then never mind. Okay, then
It got a native
better.
PS5 port.
Oh, that's good. It makes a lot of sense, the performance in terms of what you would expect the PlayStation 5 versions doing with the specs they put out. But I also like that they have ultra options, whatever they may end up being. Like what appears to be PlayStation 5 settings are the high settings, and then, they have ultra options as well above that. I presume maybe showing the split that John showed in his video between, what is it? Like you showed the 4K quality mode had some slight advantages, right?
Yeah, pretty minor. It was really mainly
Slight.
just a resolution difference between them.
Oh, well, never mind.
I mean, it was not too. The only thing that didn't scale well was, unfortunately, the motion blur shutter speed. It was tuned for 30 FPS and it does not scale it properly. So at 120, you still get motion blur, but it's really subtle because it's just
Small.
I wish maybe on the PC we can actually tweak that. That would be nice.
We'll see. But this will be one I'll be covering then. And apparently, since I was a little bit mistaken on that, with that native PS5 version, we'll have a really good sense of things about how it's panning out.
So speaking of that native PS5 version, they did actually just add some features to it this week, and I'm really happy that this is becoming kind of the norm now with their first party releases, is where if you play it on a VRR display, you get new unlocked frame rate options, which lets us actually more accurately judge the performance now. So if you're at the native 4K mode, you can now remove the 30 FPS cap, and they implemented low frame rate compensation, and it runs pretty darn well, I would say. It seems to average in the 40 to 50 FPS range a lot. So,
Wow.
Which is not bad. That's perfectly fine in VRR. The performance mode, which is 1440p, that seems, according to the OLED readout, just in the battle I tested, that's mostly in the 80 to 100 frames per second range, which feels really good with
Really
VRR.
high.
And then obviously the performance plus mode is just 120 as always, and that's pretty stable anyway, but that drops it all the way down to 1080p. So in its current form, this makes the quality mode now more interesting, but it makes the performance mode, I think, extra good, because you get close to 120, but you still get that extra resolution boost. So it's like a perfect middle ground between them.
Okay, good stuff. And that's it. That's the end of news for this week. Except, actually, there is further news. John, you have an announcement to make concerning the next DF Retro.
Oh yeah, that has just begun production this week, I think. I'm going to be kicking off mainly in the next few days, but the year of the PS Triple continues. Rich, you suggested this one, and we you know what? This will be fun. We're revisiting the Final Fantasy 13 trilogy. So all the games, all the tech, but mainly focused on Final Fantasy 13, the original. We thought it was interesting because this was a very technically ambitious game for the time, in terms of maybe less technically ambitious, but it's one of the ones that's held up the best from that era in terms of just visual design. and a lot of the choices Square made, I think, are actually rather timeless compared to the competition of that era. And I also think in 2022, where many of us, including myself, have open world fatigue, revisiting the very linear Final Fantasy 13 is actually it's kind of a fun thing to do, and it's helped me appreciate the game even more, where it's like, oh, this is really like a roller coaster ride up until like the last half of the game or last quarter of the game when you does open up, but you're basically following a fairly limited linear section, fighting battles, and the battle system is superb, just really, really good. So we're going to go through that, talk about the history. I've got the Japanese demo version released like 9 months before the final game, which has a lot of visual differences. We'll look at the Xbox 360 version, the backwards compatible versions, the Series X backwards compatible version, I guess also One X, where it's, running in basically close to 4K. We'll probably check out that PC version. Just all that stuff, yeah. So hopefully this should be a fun one.
Okay, excellent stuff. So now let's move on to supporter Q&A. This is, as the name suggests, the part of the show where we answer questions from supporters. Every week we put up a post on our Patreon asking for the latest questions and reactions, and we choose the best and answer them. We're going to kick off with a question from Kurtz. AI scalers such as DLSS and XeSS increasingly provide image quality beyond native resolution, but rarely in areas other than image stability and sharpness. As they get more advanced, could we start seeing more real-time improvements in areas beyond the obvious, such as texture filtering, shadow resolution, and VRS artifacting, and beyond that, texture resolution or even geometry? I can picture a future where we get sliders to decide how much of these technologies are allowed to dream, quote unquote, with results ranging from impressive to funky. Alex, so when we spoke with Tom Peterson about this, he was suggesting kind of like sort of style filters that AI would apply, which I guess is kind of like what Kurtz is maybe suggesting here. But in terms of improvements to stuff like texture filtering, shadow resolution, I don't know what you think. My take on this is that I think that it's doable. The issue would be, is it doable in a consistent way across frames?
Yeah, I don't know about that.
Seems a bit far-fetched, maybe?
It seems a bit far-fetched when we're talking about improving rasterized graphics. Because, like if you think about it, like shadow resolution, it's like alias. It's an alias. It's like it has a fixed amount and it has edges, and you can filter those edges with like basic filters on the GPU, but that's really about it. And I usually don't think it would be a good idea to use like generative AI to try and make those aliased edges look better. And I think we saw that as why it's not such a great idea to use generative AI for those things with DLSS1, which is essentially trying to take a mostly rasterized image and using a generative AI, like a real one. It's not the same as DLSS2, and trying to say, let's imagine a bit what that looks like at a higher res. And it wasn't so successful. So I think that is at the moment right now not a great way to use it. But I think if we're talking about a ray traced effects, like textures that were primary rendered with ray tracing, shadows that were done via ray tracing, then I think like the denoising step being assisted by some sort of AI program to make them look higher res or better is much more feasible, and it's already being done in the offline world. Like if you look at stuff like Arnold Renderer, I think, and stuff like that on PC, as well as Blender. I think they use like the denoiser, the AI denoiser that NVIDIA has if you select that. And then Intel also a little bit back had a video and a presentation and a paper demonstrating the combining of AI super sampling, the equivalent of XeSS, as well as AI denoising into one step. And I think that is much more reasonable than trying to improve rasterized graphics, which I think they just don't fit as well because they're not as noisy and random, and they have like hard edges. Yeah. That's hard to track. I don't know.
I think there would be too many visual artifacts trying to do that. It wouldn't work.
That's what I would guess at. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I've seen, basic like Topaz Video Enhance AI. It tries to do things like increasing detail and whatnot. The issue is that it has no real memory of how it did that in the previous frame. So
Hmm.
when it comes to tackle it in the current frame, it sometimes produces an effect that's slightly different. And then when you play those frames back in sequence, there's discontinuity and aliasing there. So it would be extremely tricky. I think there's far more interesting ways to deploy neural networks
Plus,
than that.
plus, like getting it to a point where it can figure this stuff out fast enough seems rather
Yeah.
challenging. Like to try to
Yeah, right.
generate all this, like without any sort of, I don't know. That's a lot to ask. I think Tom Peterson's talk about the filters is perhaps more interesting and feasible, where you can do some funny visual tricks that are just bonus features and play around with what the AI can do, but trying to add detail, not really.
Okay. Next question from Concrete Llama. This one is for John. Much like you, I've always really enjoyed Halo co-op campaigns. It's pretty much the reason I love the game so much, and I've really enjoyed revisiting them with my wife. However, as someone with multiple Xbox consoles, you have the ability to play co-op in the same room, each with your own screen, but I still seem to have a preference for split screen. I was just wondering if you just want the games to have split screen so that those without such a luxury can still enjoy couch co-op, or if split screen is actually your preference, and if so, why?
Well, I mean, obviously both. I want people to be able to enjoy it, but I actually love split screen when playing with friends and family because there is this engagement and closeness you get when you're both looking at the same image at the same time that you lose that synergy. You lose this when you have multiple screens, I feel. It never quite works the same. It's really, really, especially if you're playing with like your kids or something, like they love to tell you, Dad, look at this, check out this thing that I'm doing. That's part of the fun, and you definitely lose that when you play across separate screens. Beyond that though, like you look at modern TVs, right? Like I was capturing the Halo Master Chief collection again recently in co-op for a little for that video, and it's just direct split down the middle. Each player gets this ultra wide FOV. You get 3840 by 1080 worth of pixels on each player's screen, and on a 65-inch like OLED, that's a huge amount of screen real estate. It's like a giant ultra wide monitor for each player, right? Uh, that works really well. Like split screen has never had better potential than right now. The rise of large high resolution TVs means everybody gets a large image. I mean, even if you're four-player split screen on a 65-inch screen or bigger, on 65, each player gets a 32-inch 1080p screen to themselves, right? If you think about it that way, it's a far cry from like the original GoldenEye or something, where you have 320 by 240 split four ways on a small CRT. You don't get a lot of screen real estate or detail there, but these days you can get a ton, and that's why I would like to see it in more games. And
Yeah, multiple inputs on the screen with potential for picture in picture. I think is something that's
yeah,
a way forward there, but I think generally it's unwieldy, right?
it's a little
Yeah.
unwieldy. It really, the only place I've seen it work is on some of those ultra wide monitors where
Yeah,
you can just pipe two images in and they kind of sit comfortably side by side. That's actually pretty good, but most TVs don't have a picture in picture function that functions that way. So you can't
No.
have like two independent inputs displayed in like this nice configuration. So that's not
yeah.
simple.
I was just thinking of my 8K TV where you could have four 4K images.
See, that would be that
That'd be killer.
that would be very cool, I have to admit.
Fair enough. Okay. Next question, Edwin Crump. What is one of the biggest changes that's happened to one of your videos before it was released, and why, Alex?
Oh,
I
Spider-Man?
put this in here because of you, Alex. Because
oh
you're
well,
recent.
like Jesus Christ. uh,
Spider-Man?
in the years of COVID, games come in so hot that like I'm like desperately changing things like minutes before the video is about to be pushed out, or I'm delaying the video. Like the most recent one is obviously Spider-Man, where the changes in the last like the last week of the game were just like every patch was just making it so that like most of the data was irrelevant that I had before. Recordings had to be redone, even of basic B-roll, because otherwise I'm showing like the ray tracing not looking like it's supposed to look like. Stuff like that, where it's like, holy heck, that is big. So most recently for me, it's Spider-Man. That was the one where literally the day of, I stayed up all night redoing all my recordings. So there was.
Just to clarify, though, that was because of settings that the developers integrated at your suggestion.
Yes, I made the suggestion, but honestly, it was for the better in the end. I suffered one day.
Absolutely.
Yes. It was for the better for everyone else, though. My fault.
John, any war stories you'd want to share here? Typically, it's about patches, isn't it? Day one patches.
There's a couple. I guess one of them, less about patches, but I remember when we put out the first Spider-Man video for when it released on PS4. Even though it didn't really violate embargo, I showed this brief clip of Dr. Octopus when Dr. Octavius, like just to show off a visual feature. And Sony, no problem, of course, with that. But Marvel didn't like it, and Marvel contacted them and wanted our video taken down and replaced. But I managed to convince them to keep it, and I also was able to do that by I actually use YouTube's built-in filtering option that lets you sort of blur out the frame. So if you've watched that video since day one, you would have noticed there's a certain shot in there where all of a sudden it just goes completely blurred out. You can't see anything, and then it comes right back. And it's because of that.
Wow.
This panic moment of Marvel making some weird request out of nowhere that none of us saw coming, and I had to fix that. So that was terrifying, but we worked it out. Also, I remember one time when I was still early on and learning the ropes, I did a video on like backwards compatibility on Xbox One, the very first round of it, I think, and I was doing early testing. And I was supposed to leave on holiday that evening or day or something. And I finished all these video clips, but I had made an error in the frame rate calculations. And so I basically had to delay it to fix all those so I was like sweating bullets trying to get this stuff done, because it's like, well, we can't put out a video clip that has errors in it, obviously, and we need to put something up since you're going. So I worked very hard that night to get this stuff fixed and exported and looking good. And this wouldn't be a big problem today, right? If you remember, I mean, obviously you remember, but back in the day with the way our frame rate tools used to work, you would input everything into a program. You would then have to export that individual video clip by itself, and that was very slow. So every clip had to go through this whole process, whereas now we can just very quickly make changes to everything and quickly get stuff out. And just thinking about that reminded me of how much better the tools are now. So I'm really happy with the state of things comparatively, because the old days were rough if you needed to make changes.
Yeah, I think just thinking about things that have happened to videos before they released. I mean, the whole Ryzen 1000 situation review process was fundamentally flawed because the memory they supplied didn't work.
Oh man!
And that basically began our very successful relationship with G-Skill, whose memory was actually working properly on Ryzen 1000, and we've kind of stuck with G-Skill since for our test systems. But that was kind of crazy because it was swiftly becoming evident that Ryzen is actually really, really, its performance is closely associated to how good your memory is. And the memory they supplied, it was supposed to be like 3000 megahertz, but it only worked at 2133. That was not great. So basically we couldn't even properly test until we actually had memory that worked and the content was late. But nobody, I don't think, who bought Ryzen would want to be pairing it with 2133 megahertz memory. So our test data that we did have was meaningless. A whole bunch of sort of antics like that in the past, but what can you do? Things are gratefully things are sort of a lot better these days. Next question, Techno Dan. From listening to John's conversations on prior directs, it's clear that CRTs offer the best motion clarity and black levels. closely followed by OLEDs. However, unfortunately for many people, these are both very costly, especially going into a cost of living crisis. What's the most OLED-like technology that is more affordable? What gives the best bang for the buck? OLEDs have better black level quality than CRT, though, right?
They do.
Yeah.
It's completely stark. I think in this case, the best thing you can do is find a small 1080p PC monitor that supports both ultra high refresh rates and well as like strobing, right? So there's ways to get pretty good motion out of an LCD panel if it's configured correctly. And if you're looking at the smaller size 1080p panels with that's usually those are pretty cheap, I think, right, Alex? Like you can get like a cheap TN panel with really fast refresh rate and or strobing. And
I don't know about strobing anymore. I haven't looked at maybe how supported it is anymore. That's less, I don't know about that, actually.
That's the bummer, right? VRR is great, but it had the knock-on effect of sort of killing this motion clarity, things like that, because it doesn't really work that well together. Some monitors actually support both. And in fact, the LG CX, you can do it in Dolby Vision mode, but it has some drawbacks. If the refresh rate falls too low, it starts to flicker in a way that might potentially cause problems for people. So you don't want that, right? Because it gets real flickery when you go under like...
Can you force that in Windows at all, John? Do you know?
What?
The Dolby Vision?
Dolby Vision? I don't think so. I think it's just an Xbox thing right now. But I had to double check. But yeah, Dolby Vision is interesting there.
There's no real winner though here, is there? Because you're losing the real estate of a nice big screen.
Exactly.
But if you want OLED-like features, I guess that's the only other alternative.
That's all you can do, right? Like just exactly. So we're basically waiting for monitors to get... The best way to solve this persistence blur without this is like 1,000 frames per second. We need to get to 1,000 frames per second, and I don't think that's possible to generate frames natively at 1,000 frames per second anyway.
No,
so
that's
like
Quake.
we're in a pretty tough spot with motion clarity still, and the only way really to overcome it is, again, things like strobing, black frame insertion. It requires a trick. You have to get out of the sample and hold mode, basically, to overcome this.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Okay, next question from Nolasco. Let's try again. Try what again? When you play a game in 30 FPS, why would 4K really matter unless you go all in for photo mode? 30 FPS really doesn't do 4K justice unless you can fully appreciate them graphics in 60 FPS. Would it not be always better to optimize the game for 60? What's your take on this, Alex?
I was amused by this question.
I mean, it's actually like on like most screens, this is actually really true. Like when you turn a 30 FPS, like 4K 30, it looks pristine when the camera's still, but on like most screens, you turn the screen and it actually just doesn't almost look anything like 4K anymore. Obviously with BFI and things like that.
Well, no, what I mean is 60 is also a smeary mess on a sample and hold panel.
Yeah, 60 is also smeary, but it's technically a little bit less smeary. It's half.
You don't get the double image effect. You just get smeared.
Yeah, which is like obviously OLEDs are great, but their better pixel response times makes that that double image effect a little bit more apparent in the 30 FPS mode, unless you're messing with some other settings in there too that it might have, but then you're like maybe compromising input latency, which is already really high with the 30 FPS mode. Mm-hmm. I think this is a good question in general, just because I think pushing for 60 in all games all the time is just like a generically good thing. So I agree with you there, Nolasco. It's just a matter of you have to have like a really perfect screen to even make 60 look super, super awesome.
I think I prefer higher frame rates, of course, but I actually still think 30 FPS is perfectly viable in that your eyes get used to it, and it still looks... There's definitely benefits there, I would say. But I have reached... I don't know, this probably sounds crazy, but I've reached this point now where just plain old 60 frames per second on a sample and hold display without any sort of, persistence reduction, I don't love it anymore. Like playing a 60 FPS game without, I don't know, it just feels, it's so blurry looking to me in motion. and I actually prefer like the weird double image effect of 30 FPS now. Like,
Oh gosh, I'm not that way.
I've really fallen out of love with just normal 60, but I say that only in sample and hold, right? Like if I'm on a CRT, black frame insertion, strobing, then always 60. But I hate the way 60 looks on a normal LCD these days. I think it's really ugly. And it just makes me dislike those panels all the more. So
just to sort of sum up this question, the reason why 30 FPS exists is because you've got a limited amount of resources in a console. So you either run at 60 with lower fidelity or you run at 30 with higher fidelity. That's the way it is. Obviously, things, the lines are blurring these days with the arrival of 40 FPS, which is effectively at the midway point between 30 and 60. And also, the CPU is not so much of a constraining factor, which makes more 60 FPS experiences possible. But, there are going to be, it's just what's going to happen with Unreal Engine 5, really. That's the way things are heading, right? Where the CPU requirement on that is just so crazy. And the GPU requirement, there may well need to be some compromises.
So it's interesting, Rich. Somebody raised this with me recently when I was talking about cross-gen stuff. They're like, well, when cross-gen disappears, consoles are going back to 30. And with stuff like Unreal Engine 5, it does make me wonder if that's going to be the case. If console users will be just back down to 30 and all the 60 and 120 is just going to disappear.
Yeah, in which case, NVIDIA would love to sell you a GPU. And take you into the PC realm. I think that's, the PC is always going to be there for those who really want ultra high performance levels and, ultra high levels of fidelity. But, on consoles, you do reach a point where something has to give. That's my take on this. Okay, final question from Leo Mariano. If you want to play a PC game at 30 FPS, any reason to use the half refresh rate capo at 60 Hz over 30 Hz mode? I see you guys talking about bad frame caps, double image, but never saw a recommendation to play at 30 Hz. Why is that? Why is that, Alex?
I honestly never I don't like 30 FPS presentations. I'm different than John in that aspect, like in the modern sense. Like if I'm playing an old game and it's limited at that, I'm like, I can't do much about it. But nowadays, when I have a choice, I will never do it. So I almost never recommend it in a video as a result of that. But I think it's really your preference at that point, because I would not necessarily use things like RTSS or even Special K always to do a 30 FPS cap, because it'll be a little bit game dependent whether or not it's actually going to work as well as it could. I've had really good experiences with those, but I've also had less good experiences. But the one thing I've always had a good experience with it is the half rate refresh cap in the NVIDIA control panel. So if you want to do that, I always recommend that. If you have an AMD card, they don't have anything there, so I'd recommend probably going the Special K route, which has, a good frame rate limiter in general. And that'll definitely do 30 FPS pretty well.
So I will say I don't actually prefer 30 FPS. I just don't like how it looks on a 60 hertz LCD. That's all. So
okay. So
I that's an important distinction. That's just saying I don't use a normal LCD to play 60 hertz content because I think it looks bad. But
okay.
What Leo's actually talking about here is actually using 30 hertz output, not using a half, right? And I can answer this. It's because when you set it to 24 or 30 hertz, the input lag implications are insane. It's so laggy.
They're nuts.
That's the problem.
Not good.
It makes it much worse than doing half refresh rate mode, right? Like it's really not playable.
Yeah, like the render queue there is so long.
Yeah, it's bad.
Triple buffering. You're going to probably be triple buffering, I imagine, anyways. So that's another good point there. I mean, you'll technically, like John always talks about the double image effect, you won't get it necessarily, assuming the screen actually has a real 30 hertz mode. I honestly don't know. Like the TVs presents things like 29, 30, 24, but I've actually never looked to see what they really are doing visually always. I don't know if they're just like tricking the output or something like that, or if they are real 30 hertz.
It is 30 hertz and it's hideous.
Yeah, okay.
For the reasons John mentioned, which is that the input lag is... Well, look, consider it this way. If you've got a 30 FPS cap in a 60 hertz game and you drop a frame, you've got a 16 millisecond gap, right? Whereas if you drop the frame at 30 hertz, you've got a 33.3 millisecond gap.
Yeah.
So that's kind of pretty bad, over and above the input lag implications.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's really not good. What I will say, though, which I found quite sort of heartening, is the 30 FPS caps that are being added to PC games these days. Most of them seem to work properly, or a lot of them. Flight Simulator, Marvel Spider-Man, they are actually deliver. You select 30 FPS in the settings, and you are getting 30 FPS with consistent frame pacing.
Which is important, I think, because of things like the Steam Deck and laptops.
Yeah, well, the Steam Deck, that would only work in Windows because Proton doesn't process that 30 FPS cap correctly.
Right.
Fortunately.
So laptops then.
Laptops and also, just power constrained PCs in general, right? And I'd contend that, there's a role for that mode to play in Flight Simulator as well. When I say 30 hertz, it's actually half refresh rate. So if, it's not always 30 depending on your screen, but most of the time, I guess it would be. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, it works, right? That's great. So there is genuine progress there, and it also works on AMD as well, which it has traditionally been the problem where getting consistent frame pacing with AMD at 30 has been problematic because it doesn't have the half refresh rate mode at the control panel level that NVIDIA does. But that's kind of all I've got to say on that one. Any more thoughts on this one?
Mm-mm.
Fair enough. Okay. Well, that's it. That's the final question of the show. And man, this has been a long one. So yes, if you enjoyed it, please do like, subscribe, share, ring the bell for those notionally instant notifications. You might get a notification, you may not, who knows. DF Supporter Program, join us. Join our amazing community. Tons of early access. You can see so many of our videos days before anybody else. And bonus material, DF Retro, amazing stuff happening there. But that's all from us this week, and we'll see you next week.